Today's video, we're going to be taking a sneak peek at patch 10.5. Over the weekend, Riot has released some changes, and now we're going to take a look at them because there's some big changes to items and a full rework for Wukong. So make sure you smash that like button, destroy the sub button, and let's jump right in. First things first, let's talk about some items. We've got 5 on the list, and we're going to start with Death Stance. There's been some stat adjustments and removals, so they took the pickaxe out of the recipe and instead put in an Aegis of the Legion. Overall, the final completed Death Stance now has 60 AD instead of 80, and it has an additional 30 armor and magic resist, and this is very, very important. It might seem small, but remember, 30 armor and 30 magic resist is what almost every champion in the game starts out with. Let's throw some quick maths your way to explain exactly what this means. So if you have 30 armor and magic resist, you take about 25% less damage. But if you have 60, that means you take almost 40%. And that's a big difference because that's on every single thing that's hitting you. Now you might be writing this one off as thinking like, oh, I just do a little bit less damage, but I'm tanky, all right, no big deal, whatever, I'm still gonna buy the item, right? Yeah, you're right, you will. But think about what this does. What did Riot just do on the last patch? Cinderhulk got buffed, tanks are all over the place, and it's really hard to overcome their raw damage and tankiness right now, and there's a skewing in their win rates in their favor. But what does this armor and magic resist do against them? Now we've all done it or had it happen to us before. You're playing a tank, or you're fighting against a tank and you're playing a squishy champion, and all of a sudden they dive onto you and you have to use all your summoner spells and all of your resources, and maybe you still even die. But now, if you're buying a Death Stance, that will never happen to you again. You still have the same amount of lifesteal, and you still have the same amount of bleed staggering the damage that you're taking. But now on top of that, you're taking less damage in the first place. You've probably been in a situation where you had to buy a Vamp Scepter as an AD champion in order to sustain through a lane, and you thought about buying a Death Stance, but you decided against it because it really just didn't give you enough. Yeah, you got lifesteal, but you didn't get any attack speed, you don't get any resistances, so you're still taking all the damage that you would have before. It's just kind of staggered, and it doesn't give you enough time to actually fight people who have, crazy percentage health damage or Sunfire's damage that's just burning you over and over again. But now that changes. These Death Stance changes means that every fighter, bruiser, or whatever the heck you want to call it are now even harder to kill. On top of that, all AD carries are now even harder to kill. Imagine these champions who normally buy stuff like Sterix or Phantom Dancer and have shields and abilities that give them magic resist and defenses or mobility are now just that much harder to kill that the impact of tanks is significantly lower. And guess what's coming next? The anti-tank trend is not stopping there. Let's move on to Blade of the Ruined King, and this is a much simpler effect. But you're gonna see why it's pretty scary, especially when we're talking about bruiser champions like Irelia or Jax or maybe even Fiora, who can have a lot of attacks at once in a rapid succession. Blade of the Ruined King now does 12% of the target's current health instead of 8, and this is massive. Before, as a melee champion, Blade of the Ruined King, 2 hits would give you 16% of their current health in extra damage. Now it's 24. Instead of going 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, you're going 12, 24, 36, 48. You're getting so much more extra damage, especially the longer a fight goes on. Your damage is more upfront, and you're just going to be adding more and more and more and more the more you smash their heads in. But let's not forget, you're not just doing more damage. Remember, the lifesteal from Blade of the Ruined King and other items applies to the extra damage that you're dealing. So not only are you doing more damage, but because you're doing more damage, you're healing more on top of that. And of course, let's not forget that a lot of the champions who are going to be taking this item also take Conqueror, so they're healing even more because they're dealing more damage, and it affects everything that they take, be it Conqueror, the items themselves, the matchups that they're in where they're building more and more health because they're playing against tanks or other bruisers who build high health, and it's just like, where does it stop? It doesn't, it keeps going. And if you think I'm about to stop talking about items that are good for bruisers and other champions who are melee and take Conqueror, well, sorry to disappoint, but we're still going because Ravenous Hunter sees a change, and this one is in the same vein. They just said, screw it, we're gonna give Ravenous Hunter 50% more lifesteal. Now when I say that, keep in mind, I'm talking about moving from 12 to 18%. That's a lot of an increase. And you know what Ravenous Hunter is? That's the signature item for split pushers who just want to ignore tanks, because while they're getting slapped by a tank with like max HP damage, say like Ornn, he's gonna sneeze on them and smash their head in with a hammer. Okay, so what? They're gonna look at him, say, nice try, bud, use Ravenous Hunter, and then their entire health bar just fills up to maximum again. Do you think they care? No. As long as there's a minion wave there, they are never, ever, ever going to die. And if you do, you're griefing. That's it. I'm sorry. I'm trying to help, but like, you just gotta admit, sometimes you're making the wrong choice, man. Now, there's a smaller change that applies to Tiamat and Ravenous Hydra. All they did was take away some of the extra text on it. They took away the part that says closest enemies take the most damage on the active effect. There's no change. It still does 100% down to 60% based on how close the target is to the center. And if somehow, for some reason, this change actually means something for how the item interacts, well then Riot should probably work on hiring some people who actually know how to write coherent English sentences. Now there's one last item change on the other side of the Tiamat family tree. We're looking at the Titanic Hydra. Now before I tell you the change, I want you to keep in mind, think about what sounds familiar here, alright? Just, think about it just a little bit, alright? So, on the basic attack damage, every time you hit while you have the item, that passive wave that comes out, the damage has gone up from 1% of your max health to 1.5%. And then the active effect goes from 2.5% to 3%. The base numbers on the effects have not changed at all. They're still 5 and 40 respectively. Now, what does that sound like to you? Does that sound familiar? You know what, let me just double check the math. We gotta do 1 over 0.5, add the 3 plus 30 watermelons from Walmart, and oh, look at that, it's a 50% increase. Suddenly, traumatic flashbacks occur. You remember that the Blade of the Ruined King went from 8% to 12%, 50% increase. Thinking back to Ravenous Hydra, 12 to 18%. They're literally just buffing every bruiser item with an effect that's equivalent to 50% extra effectiveness. This just makes my brain hurt. This is ridiculous. It's so much. Yeah, man, Riven? Yeah, dude, we made her like 50% harder to kill. And oh yeah, Irelia? Yeah, that champion who could dash around, heals on her Q. Yeah, usually buys Tiamat and then goes like Ravenous Hydra because she just lifesteals off the wave like so much that you can never ever kill her. Yeah, we made her lifesteal 50% more because we thought that was exactly what she needed. Oh yeah, the champions with like basic attack a lot, the ones that usually buy like Titanic or maybe Blade of the Ruined King if they need like sustain because they don't have sustain normally. Yeah, we just decided to say, hey, screw it. Let's just make them do 50% more damage on the items, because, like, why not? Yeah, sounds like a good idea, right? Yeah, whatever. Let's go. I'm late for my lunch break. Let's get out of here. And that was our exclusive sneak peek at what goes on in Riot's offices. To stay ahead of the game with videos like these and more, including guides on champions, lanes, or even just generic tips to help you get better, make sure you go check out our website, GameLeap.com. Everything we have up there is done by challenger level players, so you're getting the best advice you possibly can. No matter what rank you are or what your goal is, that is the best place for you to go to get better. And if you're looking for a guide on something specific and you notice that we don't have a video on it yet, make sure you let us know. We are always looking to make more and better content, and I myself am working on champion guides right now, but if you guys can tell me exactly what you want, then I can get to working on it right away. That way we can keep you guys at your best and learning all the time. Alright, we've talked about that absolute travesty that is the item changes that they're proposing, so now let's move on to this Wukong rework, and this thing actually looks really cool. Some famous Wukong players have actually flown out to Riot to playtest this on their closed servers. We've even got some info on exactly where they want to take Wukong and what abilities they're looking at changing over the next week, so that when it releases on 10.5, it'll probably be exactly where we expect it. Right now, Wukong's new passive is kinda like his old one. His old one was that he just got resistances when he was near other people, but now he gains 5 plus 1 per level bonus armor and regenerates 1% of his max health every 5 seconds. This gives him sustain in lane against champions who can poke him, while also making him take less poke damage from 80 champions. A really solid passive all around, but that's not all. The bonuses from this passive also quadruple when you have 3 or more enemy champions nearby. If you're level 6, that means that you're getting 44 armor and 4% of your max health every 5 seconds. That is really nothing to sneeze at, like seriously. That's a lot of armor and a lot of regeneration. Now we do know that Riot is trying to look at a way to make Wukong less weak against AP champions because he seems to be doing perfectly fine against 80 champions with his armor. But against champions like Mordekaiser, he just gets completely toasted. Now moving on to Wukong's Q, they actually have a lot of really cool changes here that don't really change how the ability works, but just buffs it a little bit in some ways that makes it so much more easy to use all around. A ton of quality of life buffs here. First of all, the damage is just going up by a lot. There's more in the ratio now early on, and the base damage is higher, so it's just doing more no matter what. On top of that, the bonus range that it gave now scales with the level of the ability. It's slightly lower early on and slightly bigger later on. Then on top of that, the armor shred duration goes up by a full second to 4 seconds. Then the cooldown also gets reduced by a half second anytime Wukong or his clones, which we'll get into later, damage an enemy champion. The compensation here is that the cooldown goes up by 1 second at all ranks, but the mana cost is also made static at 40 at all ranks instead of 30 to 50. Oh yeah, and let's not forget one of the most impactful changes. A lot of times when you used your Q as Wukong, it felt really slow, because you'd have bonus attack speed from, say, your E, and then the speed at which it came out was fixed, but now it scales with Wukong's attack speed, so there's no more massive windup as you try and bonk somebody on the head with an extended staff. Now it can happen really quickly, and that's huge because it matters for auto attack resetting and the overall damage pattern that he has. Honestly, at this point, I might have to become a Wukong main because this is looking pretty sweet. The big changes don't stop there though, because moving on to his W, now we've got a 300 range dash, and this dash can send Wukong over a wall. On top of that, the stealth duration is now 1.5 seconds instead of 1, and the clone no longer just despawns and does magic damage. The cooldown is higher and the mana cost is lowered because now Wukong's clone makes attacks against people that are near them, and they prioritize what Wukong is targeting. It does 30 to 70% of Wukong's full damage based on the level of the ability. It'll try as hard as it can to basic attack enemies that Wukong's been hitting recently. On top of that, Wukong's E is still going to give attack speed, and it affects the clone too. It'll start smacking faster just like the normal Wukong, so it becomes harder to distinguish which one's real and which one isn't. And this is where the crazy stuff happens. Wukong's clone now also mimics his ultimate. Right now we know that Riot is really satisfied with where Wukong's Q and W are right now, and there might be small tweaks and changes there, but the core mechanics of how they work shouldn't change at all unless they go for a full scrap and rework him again for like 10.6 or something. Wukong's E has a lot of changes, and we actually have a direct quote here saying, "We probably shouldn't do this, don't count on this going to live servers." Now, that makes sense, but just for the sake of clarity, we're gonna cover what they have right now on Wukong's E. It still does damage, but now it scales with AP and does magic damage. The attack speed buff lasts a little bit longer, and the cooldown is a little bit higher early on. The mana cost is lowered. But the big kicker is that Wukong's E now follows enemy champions a lot like Lee Sin Q. That's pretty crazy, and it probably confuses Wukong players more than anything else, as that's really strange for an ability that is supposed to like end and then instantly give them attack speed, so it can actually negatively impact them because they're missing time on their attack speed, and their clone might be like light years away from them, so it's not going to do anything. Really weird, and it makes sense as to why Riot is going to change it. But let's talk about Wukong's R, which honestly is one of the funniest abilities in the game and one of the most enjoyable to use. It feels really cool to start spinning around in staff mode and just speeding up everywhere, knocking people into the air and beating them over the head. It's pretty cool, let's be honest here, right? But this is where the crazy stuff comes in. You can now cast Wukong's ultimate twice, and the TLDR is that it lasts at half duration. However, it does way more damage as it does max health damage, and it doesn't knock up twice. The second cast will only do more damage unless it hasn't hit that target with the first one. So here's the dream fantasy. Wukong dashes in with his E. Then he uses his R the first time, spins on people for 2 seconds. Then after he's done with that, or maybe he decides to cancel it a little bit early, uses his W to spawn a clone and dash away another 300 units and become invisible. Then about a second or a second and a half later, he pops out again, auto attacks somebody, bashes them in the head with their Q and the clone hits them too, and then he reactivates his ultimate again, shredding away more of their max health, knocking even more people up, having his clone hit them too, and dealing even more damage on top of that. And then after all of that's done, his E attack speed is still on because every time he uses his ultimate, the E attack speed is refreshed. Oh yeah, and did we forget to mention that the ultimate now ticks twice as fast as it did before. It does damage every 0.25 seconds, and every single time that it ticks damage, it's giving Wukong a Conqueror sack. Hello? What? Excuse me, Riot Games, this literally means that in 1.25 seconds, if Wukong just walks up to somebody and hits R, they have fully stacked Conqueror. What? Excuse me? What is this monkey business going on? This champion is actually sounding like he's going to be so much fun to play and be really, really good on top of that. Pretty much every single rework that Riot has been trying to do and that they are working on has been really baller, and Wukong does not seem like he's going to be an exception to that rule. To make sure that you're ready for big changes like this, where full champion reworks are happening, or where there's just massive item changes, make sure you go check out our website, GameLeap.com. We have guides on everything, from champion specifics to lane specifics, and even just generic tips for you to work on. Without a solid base, it can be really easy to feel like you're getting lost among all the changes, so make sure you stick with us so that you're always up to date. We're always working on making more and better content and trying to get ahead as much as we can to keep you guys as well informed as we possibly can. And I'll tell you something right now, you can absolutely bet that the moment that Warwick rework comes out, or like the Volibear rework or the Fiddlesticks rework comes out, we're gonna be making guides on it for you guys. If you made it this far, thanks for watching the whole video. How'd you like our sneak peek? We'll probably be doing another one as Riot starts ramping up PvE changes throughout the rest of the week towards 10.5. I mean, there's one thing for certain, it's gonna be one crazy patch, that's for sure. Anyways, as always, my name is Ace Windstorm, and I will see you all later.